So I would want to welcome you everyone to Blockchain Mania. A little intro about us. So the core organization team of Blockchain Mania is me and Kyriakos. Kyriakos couldn't join us today because he's still at work. So he's on some conferences. So I apologize in his name. And we've been doing blockchain events or blockchain meetups since I think summer or early 2017. So almost 3 years now, or a bit more than 3 years. 3 years now. We had big events, small events. We had a lot of international speakers. You can imagine that in the 2017 bull market, we had much more traction. So we had a couple of events with around 200 people as well. When after the bubble burst, kind of, we saw a very big correlation between the number of people that are actually coming to our meetups physically, to our meetups in Hamburg. We're based in Hamburg, Germany. And so we saw a very high correlation between the Bitcoin prices, the actually amount of people that are interested about blockchain. So I was quite, back then it was quite a surprise for me. As you can imagine, it's not a surprise anymore. And we actually can see that this year as well, we got some more people are joining the sessions. So as I told you, we're trying to funnel our communication mostly in Twitter. So please use this link to follow us on Twitter. Currently, I think we have like, I don't know, I think it was like 15 followers, which is still a bit embarrassing, but I hope that with the sessions we get more and more, because we want to use this as our main channel for communication, with our community. If you have any ideas of topics that are related to blockchain which you want to present in our meetups, then just feel free to write me an email. You can see it on the screen right now. We're very open usually, so usually how it goes, you will just send me an email and offer to present something, and then we're probably going to have a short chat about it to see exactly what should be the agenda about or of your talk, and then we're probably just going to schedule you for one of our future events. Today I'm very honored to present you Dr. Maxim Orlovsky. He's currently based in Switzerland. He's a co-founder of a company called Pandora Core. He's going to talk about the subject of his talk today is about how they work to extend the Bitcoin infrastructure to issue assets using the RGB protocol and the Lightning Network, which I think is a very interesting concept. And you can imagine that Bitcoin, or the Bitcoin infrastructure, is only 10 years old, and it's kind of the layer one is very, has a very good security model, and it's kind of censorship resistant, it's unstoppable. But you can imagine that now a lot of different companies around the world are working on layer 2 and layer 3, kind of the future generation or extension of this decentralized infrastructure. And this is what Dr. Maxim Orlovsky will represent us today. A small disclosure, I met Maxim, I think in the summer last year in a blockchain conference in Hamburg. And actually he had a talk after a talk I did about Mimblewimble, the Mimblewimble protocol. And then I listened to his concepts and I said, you know what, it's very, very interesting. And to know who the people that knows me, I'm a co-founder of a company called Coinix. It's a small investment firm that is based here in Hamburg, and we're of course always looking to invest in unique opportunities. And after his talk, I was fascinated about different concepts he talked about. I have to say that I didn't understand everything you said back then, but I had a feeling that that we want to understand how we can get involved. And then we met a couple of times. We actually invested in Pandora Core, so our investors in Coinix has exposure to the Pandora Core activities. It's just kind of a disclosure. Regardless of our investment in Pandora Core, I think they're working on a very, very interesting piece of infrastructure, and it's all open source as well, right? So they're working with different players in this industry, or industry leaders, which Maxim is going to elaborate more about that. So without further ado, this was my intro. Maxim, feel free to introduce yourself a bit, and you can start. So thank you everyone for watching, and after his talk, we're going to have a Q&A session, so feel free to stay. Thank you very much, and Maxim, the microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Omri, for the introduction. It was very welcoming. I will start my screen sharing. Do you see my screen?
Yeah.
Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. As Omri said, I'm Maxim Orlovsky, founder of Pandora Core. I have two other my partners present here in the company. And today I would like to tell you more about the work we've been involved that allows how we believe, and not only we, but many other companies involved into the consortium that actually makes this technology happening, that we believe that it's a new stage in the digital asset and tokenization model. The technology is named RGB, and it's about making digital assets confidential first, and the second to make them work on the Lightning Network at the layer 2, which is actually not yet solved by nearly anybody task. And I would like to give business level introduction with some high level technical details. I will be happy to answer more detailed technical questions. A bit about myself. I'm Chief CEO at Pandora Core. I'm kind of joking that I'm not Chief Executive Officer, but Chief Engineering Officer, meaning that I'm much more focused on the technology development, but also being involved into business development as well. And I'm also a founder of LNP Standards Association. I will tell a bit more about this non-profit organization, which actually at this stage governs the development of this technology. So a few words about my company. It is a Swiss-based company. We established it 2018. The actual development and work on the stuff we are doing, the protocols, it wasn't just RGB. RGB came later. We started with other protocols. I will be briefly mentioning them at the end. The actual work on that project started in 2017. Our goal is to build layer 2 and layer 3 technologies, so technologies on top of scalable systems like Lightning Network, and build these technologies for scalable smart contracts and even computing, including machine learning, for the trustless Internet of Value. We try to bring innovations to both networks and enterprise. We provide some services as a company. I will briefly also mention at the end of my talk the business model that we follow and the services that we provide. And so far we had 3 rounds of funding. As Omri said, the last one was led by the fund that Omri is partnered, Coin9, and we are very appreciate that. So why we are doing this project, why it is important to do digital assets today. It's been a story for at least 4 years that nearly everybody are talking since the release of Ethereum about digital assets, digitalization of tokens, digital tokens. Why it's not there yet? Well, we have a lot of digital tokens, but I think that nearly everybody will agree that, first of all, from the business perspective, we don't see that demand that was expected. Most of that demand was hype-driven previously, and they're not working. They're not delivering that level of new functionality that was promised by them. So what are the problems preventing digital assets to properly boot up? We think that one of the first problems is low scalability. The scalability for existing digital asset solutions is limited by blockchain itself. But blockchain layers they are built into, and blockchains are inherently scalable because the core concept of blockchain that everybody have to validate all the information and to store all the information, which is computationally and storage non-scalable. And there are no assets, they leverage layer 2 of the technologies that work on top of blockchain, like Lightning Network, and there is no way of bringing digital assets as of today into Lightning Network to get rid of this transaction and storage scalability problem. The second problem with the current digital assets is that they have quite a poor privacy model. Again, with the blockchain, everyone in the world see all the transaction history. It's one may say that we all regulated, all companies regulated anyhow, and businesses doing digital assets, they are mostly regulated businesses, so it's not a problem, but it is a problem. First of all, because it's not only about regulation or transparency, it's also about market transparency. Each company are working on the market with the competitors. And the first company who starts doing transactions with their clients, with their counterparties through the blockchain with digital assets, they will expose themselves to all the competitors. The whole history of their operations, every commercial secrets of their operational activities will be publicly exposed, which is undesirable. So the first mover here gets a disadvantage instead of advantage. So that's the privacy is one of the core issues preventing the proper adoption of digital assets. And zero knowledge, which may guarantee the privacy for digital assets, is nearly about absent for the assets. It is there for digital currencies. We have Green, Beam, Mimblewimble currencies, we have Monero, we have Zcash, we have a lot of privacy coins, but it's digital currencies. If you'd like to issue your assets, like company shares, securities, you can't do that on top of these blockchains, and you can't benefit this zero knowledge fancy technology for your business needs with digital assets. The last challenge is that we think that smart contracting systems existing today, they are quite inefficient. Why they are inefficient? We see that they are mixing asset ownership concept, who owns the asset, who has the access right to it, property rights to the asset, with the contract, smart contract business logic, how the asset has to evolve, which rules it follows in general. They're all mixed all together into a single language and single blockchain layer, which is transparent, unnecessarily transparent, and non-scalable. The governance problem, again, because of this mixture between ownership and the smart contracts, it's always the question who governs the smart contract and how the smart contract governance issues are different from the ownership issues. Because basically now, with the Ethereum-like systems, the persons who control the smart contract, they actually own all assets. They can change the smart contract in a way that they will change the ownership of the assets. And that intermixture of asset ownership and business logic actually creates a huge security leak and censorship problem. And there are no formally verified languages that are used for digital assets so far. There are a lot of attempts to bring them, but existing languages like EVM, Solidity, Ethereum-based machine, and WASM, they're not formally verifiable, meaning that you can't be sure about the security of the smart contract. You can't estimate and you can't mathematically prove that there are no possible hacks to the system. And we saw when the price of the tokens was high, how much of the value was stolen or lost forever because of the smart contract bugs. So RGB was created to solve these issues. The project started before we actually joined it. It started in 2016, and it was originally envisioned by Giacomo Zucco in discussions with Peter Todd. I will mention his name a few times over the presentation. Peter Todd is one of the quite famous cypherpunks. He was the guy who was with Satoshi Nakamoto from day zero of Bitcoin, reviewing his work and contributing into Bitcoin Core a lot. It was supported by, and it is supported by Tether and Bitfinex and other sponsors since early 2019. Right now, Pandora Core, since the summer of last year, is the main subcontractor for the technology development. And the actual technology is governed by non-profit LNP Standards Association, where we as Pandora is also co-founders. LNP stands for Lightning Network Protocol, Bitcoin Protocol. The concept of LNP-BP is that we would like to upgrade these systems to the level that the way TCP/IP protocols has changed and shaped internet, that way LNP-BP, Lightning Network Protocol, Bitcoin protocol, will be able to shape the Internet of Value of tomorrow. A few words about this association. Was founded last year by these parties. We oversee the development of LNP-BP technological stack, meaning layer 2 and layer 3 stuff, quite fancy. Not only RGB, there are other protocols like Storm for storage, Lightspeed for scalable Lightning micropayments, and so on. Contributors to the parts of the protocol and parts of the protocols were reviewed by people like Adam Back, who is the creation of Proof of Work original algorithm and founder of Blockstream, Peter Todd, Andrew Pelstra, creator of Wimble, and Lightning Networks developers Christian Decker, creator of C Lightning, René Picard, who is very famous Lightning Network contributor and co-author of a new book on Lightning Network development, Mastering Lightning Network with Antonopoulos. So those who are interested, you can always go to the GitHub where all our activities and materials are present. What is RGB? RGB is a client-validated state and smart contract system. I will explain each word of this formulation, of this formula. And this system is working at layer 2 and layer 3 in Bitcoin and Lightning Network, meaning over Bitcoin layer 2 and over Lightning Network at layer 3. It works with Lightning Network well from the day one. It doesn't use on-chain blockchain space anyhow. It doesn't have a footprint on blockchain. You can track that there is something from RGB system is present in the blockchain. I will also briefly explain how it could be. That's quite an important property. One of the founding factors why the RGB have so strong privacy guarantees, because basically in the blockchain there is nothing specific to RGB and no information is present in OBAQ form. It scales independently from Bitcoin and from blockchain because it basically works in Lightning Network and it doesn't have a data storage system within blockchain itself. And it heavily uses zero knowledge and very different levels, at multiple levels, and privacy built on best of products. It uses bulletproofs from Wimble, and it uses many aspects of confidential assets from Liquid, which one of the well-known confidential assets provider as of today. Actually, when I was saying that today you can't issue assets with confidentiality and zero knowledge, I was wrong because I forgot about Liquid. Of course, we can do that on Liquid, but again, they are not working on Lightning Network. How RGB is working? We started looking for problems to solve and not for the solutions to solve. That's why it's quite a technological project, hopefully providing strong security guarantees. And the main two problems the technology was addressing from the very beginning is blockchain inscalability and blockchain transparency. So how to solve that blockchain is not scalable and blockchain is transparent when we would like to build blockchain-based digital assets? It's quite contradictory. The solution is to use client-side validation. It is a concept proposed by Peter Todd in 2016, a long time ago. And the idea is, let's just not put the data into the blockchain. If it doesn't scale and if it is transparent, just don't store the data there. And this solves the scalability problem. And nobody in the world sees the transaction other than the party performing it. The problem, however, is different. How we will use blockchain then if we are not storing the data? A blockchain we're using as a cryptographic commitment layer. Instead of storing the data, we store the commitments created with the cryptographical functions, and these commitments are stored within public keys in a way that actually public key is tweaked or modified using homomorphic elliptic curves properties in a way that we have a different private key. And this private key has the same size. And for any other party, they can differentiate one public key from another public key. They're looking the same. Well, they're different, but they're anonymous. You can't differentiate what was the original public key. And we tweak this public key with this homomorphic function, and this creates a commitment. Because of discrete log problem of elliptic curves, we can guarantee that when the commitment is exposed, it can be proven that there were no other commitment than this one. Before the commitment exposed, no other party may see that there is some commitment within the public key. And the actual history of the asset, of its ownership history and evolution history, I will explain that you can do dynamic assets. They can, for instance, have an inflation or deflation embedded in their properties and many other things. And this evolution, it is stored on by the client as a file, as a data outside of blockchain. And only commitments to those data at each step, at each operations are going into the blockchain, or not in blockchain, into the transaction, because transaction can be off-chain like with the Lightning channels. So that's why it is working over the Lightning without modification of the Lightning network itself, because we don't add data to the Lightning network. And basically this idea that the history of the state, of the asset, of the ownership is maintained by an asset owner, it is called client-side validation. It is the client who owns, he validates. And when I transfer a set to other party, this party is getting the data and validates them, validates their validity and commitment history in blockchain, making sure that I do own assets and I have the right to transfer, and then the actual transference happens. A bit more about how it works in technical level. I wouldn't dive deep into the technology. I will just explain the core concept here. It works with a single-use seal, another proposal by Peter Todd. Idea of single-use seal is that you can create such a seal that you can always find if it was opened, and that it was opened once, like with the containers, with the logistics. When you shape containers, you can put a seal, and when it broke, and you can't replace it. So meaning that the container was opened, and you can deterministically define that. That's how the name appeared. And they work with Bitcoin transactions quite well. The structure of Bitcoin transaction is, you all know, the transaction has a set of inputs, multiple inputs, maybe one, maybe many, and a set of outputs. And these outputs, when you create transactions, they are all unspent. They are holding funds. And the day you create a transaction spending one of these outputs, these particular outputs become spent output, and other outputs are remaining unspent, continuing to hold the funds. The seal definition is the procedure by which on the client side, on the client validated side, we as a parties involved in some protocol say that this particular unspent transaction output, we define it, addressing the transaction ID and the output number, that this particular transaction output for us has a special meaning. And nobody else in the world knows that meaning and knows that we have selected this transaction output because there is nothing going there. And this is a seal definition. And we agree on a protocol in which when this transaction is spent, we basically log the seal. And we may be sure that because Bitcoin transaction output can be spent only once, Bitcoin prevents double spending, that this event is singular. And we also agree that within the transaction that spends this output, we put a cryptographic commitment to some data. And these data are actually part of this client validated history. So we can build a graph on all the transactions, meaning that at each step we assign an asset ownership to the Bitcoin transaction outputs. And whoever owns that transaction output, they owns the assets as well. But the assets are not in blockchain. They are not there. It's just agreement between us. And it is an agreement that each time the owner of that assets would like to transfer them, he spends this transaction output and puts commitment to the new ownership into the transaction that spends this output and these assets. It's quite a complex concept. Unfortunately, it always takes a lot of time to get it. It's not intuitive at all. But I think you can, for now, I wouldn't dive deeper into technical details. It just follows the concept of Bitcoin security model. So ownership is based on the Bitcoin transactions, and access rights are defined by Bitcoin script in this output. So we don't invent any new security system. And the RGB is built by, like, summarizing this part of the story. The RGB build is of two main components. The first one is commitments. These cryptographical commitments to the state transfers, to the asset transfers, they provide and prove unique history. They are private because they are stored on the client side. They are not seen on blockchain. They don't have any storage cost on blockchain. They work with blockchain and Lightning Network. Well, in the same way, they work with the transaction actually, not blockchain itself. And they're extremely scalable because they can do that over the Lightning Network, and you have millions of updates per hour, for instance. Off-chain data, and the second part is off-chain data and the code, which is held by a set or contract owner. Again, we don't have any blockchain storage costs because it is stored. It just points transaction output, but if you don't have those data, you wouldn't know which transactions outputs are pointed out and assigned special meaning or assets. And the off-chain scripts, the smart contracts, business logic is stored apart from the ownership rights, which are in Bitcoin transaction outputs, and it operates separately from Bitcoin blockchain. So you can draw this like in this way, in such a way that there is a wide Bitcoin blockchain, the layer 1. It defines state ownership, and there are client validated states. It's actually a graph. It's not a chain, it's a graph of data pieces, and each of the pieces are committed in somewhere into some transaction on the Bitcoin blockchain. And by looking just on Bitcoin blockchain, you are not able to reconstruct the transaction graph. You need this data stored off-chain to reconstruct it, and these data are only in the hands of the owners of the assets. So I would like to emphasize two core theses, economical thesis and design thesis behind RGB. And I think this is one of the reasons why smart contract idea got quite wrong with Ethereum and other systems that are present on the market. Because I think that there always must be an owner, well-defined owner of the asset, of the state, I mean state, smart contract state. And this owner should be separated from the party that actually operates smart contract. So state ownership is not, it's previous slide. So the state owner should be separated from the party who created and owns smart contract, from the party like issuing the asset. I can be a company that creates a securities, company shares or bonds, and the moment I issue the share, I can't control the ownership. It's bearer rights. So the smart contract and digital assets should be a bearer rights. I, as an issuing company, define the logic of this asset, the behavior forever, and it can't be modified without my involvement. But the ownership is modified by owner. The ownership is bearing right. And that parts are not separated in Ethereum. They are not separated in any smart contract system out there today. And they're separated finally with RGB. The second thesis I'd like to discuss is that state ownership is not equal to the state validation. Because ownership defines who can change the state, who can transfer the asset. Validation defines how the state can be changed. So I, for instance, can transfer an asset in a way that will invalidate it. So I still have the right to do it, but I will just void the asset because I did that in a wrong way. And the logic of state validation is defined by the issuer. Issuer defines the ways the asset can evolve. Will be there inflation or not? Well, will there be a fee per each transaction or not? And I can't change that. I can do that I cannot follow these rules, and then the party who accepts this asset from me, they will just fail to validate and they wouldn't accept this asset. So the consensus works the same way like is in blockchain, but there is just no blockchain to store the data. This allows to avoid mistake done by blockchain smart contracts, mixing layers and the script and everything all together into a single story, a single layer with a lot of problems coming out of that. And this actually unlocks the possibility to ship the smart contracts and assets over the Lightning Network. So I would like to dive into what smart contract is. So we covered how the assets should work, how the smart contracts should work, this layer separation, but I would like also to pay some attention to what smart contract is. Because the original meaning of the smart contract and the logical meaning is very different from what is perceived as a smart contracts today, again, because of Ethereum and the history of the past years. The smart contract is a prearranged agreement. It is an agreement between the parties. It's not the code. The code is the way to express the agreement, but the smart contract itself is the agreement. That's why if you have only two parties involved into the agreement, there is no necessity for the whole world to see that agreement and validate it. It's only two parties who are in agreement should validate the agreement, or a third party that they predefine can mitigate any disagreements between them. But again, not the whole world. And the whole governance problem that we have with Ethereum is actually very artificially created from the fact that it's the whole world and actually miners who validates the agreements of the parties which haven't put the right to the miners to validate these agreements and even doesn't know who will validate it. And they don't have enough power to validate it by themselves. So smart contract is a pre-arranged agreement of trade, meaning mutual voluntary exchange of goods like assets or state related to some contract. The most important how the smart contracts are different from just contracts, it is that is automatically executed under certain conditions, where automatic means it is executed anonymously. No KYC is done in the process of execution. KYC can be external part of the process, but not internally, and in a trustless way. Because KYC is basically needed to protect from the failure of the execution, to enforce the execution. With a smart contract, execution enforcement comes from the code of the contract, but actually not even from the code, but from the consensus rule, from the agreement of all the parties upon following some well-defined rules, and upon the fact that if you don't follow, you would break the consensus and you will be left without an asset, basically. That's how proper smart contract works. And here, these parts became, the agreement is actually the code. The goods are digital assets, and conditions are contract parties or external actors able to call some methods of the agreement, methods of the code. That's how we define smart contract within RGB. So we have components of code, ownership, and access rights. And ownership is put into blockchain, and the access right is put into blockchain, but the smart contract code is kept outside of the blockchain, and actual data is kept outside of blockchain. I wouldn't cover this slide. I already said everything of that. It's just a recap. And for the smart contract language in RGB, we use Simplicity. Simplicity is a language proposed and developed by Blockstream developer Russell O'Connor. It is planned to be included into Liquid blockchain. It has formal semantic, very well-defined formal semantics, formally verifiable, mathematically verifiable, and it's very succinct, meaning that you can basically create a very complex Turing-complete algorithms on it in just few kilobytes of code. So to summarize this part of my talk, RGB is an asset and smart contract protocol for LNP-BP. Spectrum, which is another protocol related to RGB, I will be mentioning it a few times, is a DEX protocol, decentralized exchange protocol for RGB assets and smart contract interaction, inter-smart contract data exchange, which can act across Lightning Network in multi-hop payments. Parts of this LNP-BP technology stack we've been talking about, when we include the RGB and Spectrum into the equation, become the following. There is a Bitcoin blockchain, bottom layer. It defines ownership and access rights. There is a RGB, data, metadata, and Turing-complete smart contract business logic. There is a Lightning Network, which is a layer for transactional scalability used by both Bitcoin and RGB assets, and the Spectrum as a decentralized exchange and smart contract execution over the Lightning Network. I've been showing this diagram already. I would like to say that with such a design, it's a completely different attempt to build all the stuff that was attempted to build over the last years, naming sharding, Ethereum, DAG. You see that the assets here is actually kept as in the form of DAG, digital assets, smart contracts, confidentiality, DEX, inter-blockchain protocol. So basically, RGB and Spectrum takes a completely different technology to achieve the goals that were defined by these ideas in a technologically different and more efficient way. Coming to the final part, what is possible to do with RGB? Well, you can issue securities and different fungible asset types, either centrally or federation issued anonymously or publicly, with possibly options for secondary issues. You can deny it, you can define it for demurrage, for inflation. For instance, you can do a negative interest rate on your asset, for instance, which is, for instance, important for digital Swiss franc. You can issue non-asset forms of bearer rights. You can do non-fungible assets like collectibles, digital collectibles. But it's not only about assets. It's also about doing decentralized digital identity or roaming profiles. The protocol, because RGB is more generic than just a digital assets, it's about smart contract logic. And you can even build a complex accounting system and utility tokens without a value, without monetary value, in the original meaning of the utility token. And even further, you can build a very complex and highly efficient smart contract systems. I was saying that our company started with the protocols for computing, trustless, scalable computing and machine learning on top of blockchain. And we found blockchains and smart contract systems inherently unscalable for the goals that we had. So this RGB is the tool of a choice for our company to build such systems on and to develop the protocols that we've developed for 3 years further and finally bring them to the production level scalability. So, and that's all about RGB, and it is scalable, confidential, works with our Lightning Network, with decentralized exchange functionality and operating as a bearer instrument. And as a last slide, I would like to say a few words about this was all about the open source technology. It is available for everybody. It is governed by an association, anyone can join it. However, as a company, we have investors, we have our own business roadmap. We would like to build a line of the products basing this technology and some other technologies. And we divide these products into 3 main niches, which are solutions, mostly for enterprise clients, products, and services. So we would like to start. We're already offering services for the tokenization of digital assets with RGB technology, and in talks with a few entities, including Bitcoin Swiss for digital franc. We also provide elastic infrastructure for running digital asset and blockchain type solutions by the companies. And starting from the late next year, we will be providing micropayment solutions and services, also using RGB and related technologies like Lightspeed. I haven't time to cover that today with integration. For the services, we plan to build and sell a hosted Bitcoin Lightning nodes with a micropayments where you get paid per API request, and storage and computing services once the protocols that we are building on top of RGB will be launched in 2 years from now. And today we actually focus on the first two products, which is Bitcoin Node. It is Bitcoin-based RGB token addressing 2 billion confidential transactions market, leveraging the RGB privacy properties. And My Citadel wallet, it will have both application and white label version, supporting RGB assets and Bitcoin nodes with a chat-based payment functionality like Keybase, but with RGB working over Lightning Network. And later, in 2 years, we plan to build an appliance, a small device that can be bought by families and put at home, earning money through the payments that are happening through the routing. So right now, we are finalizing RGB, preparing for USD Tether on RGB and Lightning Network Cloud launch together with Tether Incorporated. We're consulting Bitcoin Swiss on possibility of digital Swiss franc on top of RGB and Lightning Network. They are interested in this project. We are building joint venture with exchanges, payment providers, and crypto banks for launching Bitcoin node. Working on launching the wallet and looking for this and next year funding round, about 2 million, to finalize the products and launch them to market. The actual technologies which are required for those products are done, developed, and now we are planning to develop a business on top of that. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time.
It was a lot of different concepts that you talked about, so I'm sure the participants here is something to think about. Thank you first of all for your presentation, Maxim, for your time. I see that in the chat there are a couple of questions, so maybe we could start the Q&A session. Can you see the chat?
No, I'm trying. When I exited the presentation mode, I lost the screen of Zoom, so I think I have to log out and come back.
I can
because the window disappeared.
You could stop sharing your screen probably.
Oh, I'm still sharing it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you will see.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Thanks.
Can you see the chat section?
Yeah. When I lose my off-chain data, will I lose my asset with it? Yes, for sure you will. And it works the same like with the private keys. If you lose your private keys, you lose your digital assets. You may say that, well, with a digital asset, I have to stay more as to save and store more information. But it's not the case, because we already, a part of this stack will be the technology that allows you just with a seed words to control access to the whole decentralizedly stored, encrypted data regarding your assets. So still, as with the digital currencies, at the end of the day, in 2 years, probably from now, you will need to store only a seed phrase, both for Bitcoins and digital assets. And in your opinion, what is the best use case? It's a question. What is the best use case for KYC-less assets? Company shares and stable coins are mostly impossible without KYC. Well, I wouldn't say that, because basically, if we are talking about publicly regulated markets, yes, but you can issue, you can have a private company with private investors, and in most of the countries, you don't need any KYC for that. Or you can issue a bearer rights. You can issue like tickets to the conference. A lot of different stories where you can leverage KYC systems. Derivatives. Next question, derivatives. Stable coin could be constructed a derivative too. Well, basically, yes. And first of all, that's the reason why Bitfinex was interested Tether company. They would like to bring USD Tether with this technology to the market. And we also plan to do a stable coin in terms it is stable comparing to Bitcoin price. It is RGB token, private token, but it's backed by Bitcoin. It is stable comparing. One Bitcoin is always one Bitcoin. But you can use it for confidential transactions, unlike you can do with Bitcoin. Next question. How far are you into the progress of creating this vision? Are you planning in the long away future to work together with hardware wallets like Trezor? Yeah, we are quite far. Basically, the technology is on-chain part is ready. Off-chain part will be ready by start of the summer. And this summer, we plan that Bitfinex, together with us, will be launching USD Tether on it. And also, we plan to work on our products near the summer as well to be launching them. And for sure, we will need hardware wallets integration. And the time for it will be after the official launch. And I think that they will be interested because of the presence of USD Tether, which is very common token. To integrate the technology, we will be working on software developer kit for wallet developers, including hardware developers, starting from this month. So yes, we own that route. And I assume that the previous question is from a colleague of mine and one of our investors, is that regarding the stable coin constructed as a derivative, he meant that it can be algorithmical, because we had discussions with him about that. Yes, you can do, and not just a stable coin backed by the reserve or fractional reserve, you can do a stable coin backed by certain business logic and algorithmical stable coin as well. That's all for, yeah.
Except of you mentioned that you have a plan, or that Tether or Bitfinex are planning to issue the USDT on top of RGB, and the second use case or the second asset was the Swiss franc. Do you what kind of assets do you expect after these two projects? Which kind of assets do you expect to onboard first to the RGB protocol?
Well, it seems that stable coins are going first anyway. They are kind of very popular assets these days, and they certainly need this functionality to get into the Lightning Network. The second part of the story is gaming tokens related to different games. We already had interest in this sphere. And the third interested parties are, we have a company who is also a part of this association, not yet disclosed, but it will provide a lot of different certificates, tickets, and different forms of non-financial assets on this technology. Also an interest in the personal identity, decentralized personal identity. Few projects already contacted us. And the final is of non-fungible tokens, namely collectibles. A few artists and projects are waiting for that for already 2 years to start using.
And are there any trade-offs of issuing the asset on RGB and not just using other token standards or other public permissionless blockchains?
Well, the main trade-off, I think that as of today, we don't have a lot of existing wallets supporting it. So it will take time. So basically, you would be limited very much in the software that you can use, and it will take some time to build that. That's why we are building a wallet that will support RGB from day one, and we have at least 3 other wallets looking for integration, and we already starting working on integration projects with them. So at the time of the launch, there would be some software supporting the technology.
Thank you.
And the question is, another question appeared. What are the main programming languages you use for your project and why? The main programming language for the reference implementation that we are doing is Rust. And why we are using it? Well, we had just 2 options actually, Rust and Haskell, because we were looking into quite robust environments. We like the concept of sorry, I'm a bit tired of these family programming languages. The family name for Haskell-like languages, not functional, but functional programming languages where you can do a formal verification. You can't do that with the Rust. It's not functional per se, but it's one of the most functional, relatively functional languages from the quite broad family. And why we choose Rust, not Haskell? Because the most of cryptographic things we are using, they are written in Rust by the creators, like Wimble Rust version by Andrew Palstra, and we're using also Miniscript because of different questions. We can't use C because it's quite, you can do very advanced software with the C, but we don't have that guarantees that if the software compiles, it with a high probability doesn't have any bugs. With the C, you never know. So we choose Rust. Formal proofs. You mean of the technology itself, not of the code, because as of today, it's I haven't seen any formal proofs for the code systems. For small, simple they are, but not for large ones. Formal proofs, again, we are not inventing any zero-knowledge protocol or any protocol. So basically, we are relying, for instance, on bulletproofs, which is formally proven. We are relying on Pedersen commitments. Again, they are formally proved for confidential amounts. And we're using the knowledge that is already there. We're just combining it in a different way. Are you technically, another question, are you technically a competitor for Liquid Network by Blockstream, but you're working kind of together with them on that? Well, they're not part of the association from the legal perspective. I was saying that people who are Blockstream co-founders and members, they were contributing to the RGB, different parts of it, they were pre-reviewing. So it's not like Blockstream is a formal member of the association. It's not that case. The story is more complex than just a competition. Well, we are not competitors to Liquid Network at all. We may see that the assets on RGB and confidential assets on top of Liquid Network are competitors. But confidential assets in Liquid Network is not a business of Blockstream. They're not getting any revenue from people who issue confidential assets. They get revenue from Liquid Network being used by confidential assets. And RGB is the technology that can work not only on blockchain and Lightning Network, but also on Liquid and Lightning Network over Liquid and in Lightning Network between Liquid and Bitcoin. So basically, it's not removing the adoption from Liquid Network and confidential assets there and business from Blockstream. Moreover, if RGB would be successful, we think that there is a chance, and Blockstream sometimes agree on that RGB may be a version 2 of confidential assets officially supported by Blockstream on Liquid Network. That's why, because basically it is a second version of confidential assets made with the same technology. So it's a concept of Peter Will, of confidential transactions plus bulletproofs by, again, Andrew Palstra and Peter Will, enhanced by Peter Todd's idea on client-side validation and single-use seals, put it all together by the association and us into a working technology.
Any other questions? Okay, then I guess we're done. So just to wrap it up, Maxim, thank you very much for taking your time to present your very diversified project, I think, because you're working in parallel on so many different things. I'm sure it's even more complex than what you stated. But thank you everyone for joining us, and hopefully I will upload the recording of this in the next 7 days, if I find the time. Then I want to thank you everyone for joining us, and Yeah, just keep in mind that we now use our Twitter account and the meetup page to announce our future events. And a reminder, if you have any topics that you think are interested for our community, which are related to blockchain, just contact me. You can contact me on LinkedIn or on Twitter or on meetup.com. And if no one has any more questions to me or to Maxim, then I think you can continue your evening in quarantine. Try not to go crazy too much. I hope that this quarantine situation wouldn't continue to be more than at least 1 month. So we'll hopefully in 1 month we could already meet in person in Hamburg. And yeah, have a nice evening, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy, don't go out, and yeah, have a
Thanks
good
for the opportunity to present.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Ciao.